On today's show, the biggest questions facing the Capitals going into the 2025-2026 season.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the questions surrounding the Capitals heading into the 2025-2026 season. What are some of the things that we know is that the Capitals are going to be leaning into the youth more than they have in years? What lies ahead for the Capitals? I'll talk about that a bit later. Connor McMichael at the third line center. That is where he is penciled in, at least. And then in the final segment, I'll talk about, is this Ovechkin's final season? But just to get it going here, talking about, is there enough depth at the wing positions? Now, when you say enough depth, I think it's important to clarify that there are a lot of candidates in the mix. It's not for a lack of players that could vie for those jobs. But for me, I think the big thing is quality players that are going to fill those roles. And did the Capitals do the right thing by not going out and making any of their big acquisitions? As we know, it was Justin Sordiff, it was Declan Chisholm, and they re-upped on Anthony Beauvillier. So let's dive into that in the first segment of today's show. And we'll start with the wings here. On the surface, the top line looks fine, right? And I think you could say the top 6 in general is in a pretty good position. You still got Ovechkin doing what he does on the top line, putting the puck in the back of the net on a regular basis. Tom Wilson on the other side playing his heavy game. We've also seen Alexei Protas spend some time on the first line as well. And then you got Dylan Strome and Pierre-Luc Dubois, the guys that are holding it down on the first and second line. So the core, it's still really solid, and it's good. You know, some teams don't have a really solid 1 through 4 line combo. So that's where things get a little bit tricky or interesting, I guess you could say, for the Capitals, because when you look at the roster, especially after last season, depth scoring was an issue. That you saw a lot of production from the top 6. You saw some from the fourth line, but the third line in particular, well, that was a glaring deficiency. And I think it's easy sometimes to brush those things under the rug. When you take a look at the Caps, who finished 51, 22, and 9, first in the Eastern Conference with 111 points. They were second in the entire NHL in goals scored at 286. So I think that sometimes the feeling is why am I going to try to fix something that isn't broken? I mean, what else could you have asked for? I mean, I guess you could ask for a Stanley Cup win, but as far as regular season success is concerned and making it to the playoffs, well, the Capitals checked the boxes that needed to be checked. And when you take a look at those numbers, you know, it's nothing to scoff at. It's elite. But let's be honest, the offense around the Capitals is, well, a bit top heavy. So you take a look at McMichael, Ovi, Strome, Wilson, Dubois. Those are the guys that carried the bulk of the mail. When you get to the bottom 6, like I said, not much consistent production. And I think, you know, what is going to take the Capitals to the next level is if they could have even scoring in lines 1 through 4. I think the teams that do it the absolute best are those teams. And now some of those depth pieces are gone. I'm talking Lars Eller, who is a steady presence. We know that signed with Ottawa. And I think that with Lars Eller, he didn't have the season that he had hoped for. He said that he felt like he was underutilized. He played some of his least amount of minutes since he joined the league. But, with that said, the third line wasn't knocking it out of the park. And, well, neither was Lars Eller. That if he made the most of his opportunities, you got to think that Spencer Carberry would have found a way to work him in somewhere else. The other big additions from a couple summers ago, Andrew Mangiapane gone to Edmonton, and Taylor Raddysh off to the Rangers. Now, when I talk about those players, I don't think they were very impactful. I know that's not a real word, but Lars Eller, Mangiapane, and Taylor Raddysh aren't the guys that are like, those are the guys that put the Capitals in the position to do great things. Now, to be clear here, they do deserve some of the credit. They were in the lineup, so I'm not going to try to diminish what they did for the team. They played their part, right? So now the Capitals have 3 lineup spots to fill at least. So who steps in? I guess the player, that the Capitals put a lot of faith in. They brought back Anthony Beauvillier, 2-year deal. And all things considered, I love this deal. At first, at the trade deadline, when the Capitals traded for and acquired Anthony Beauvillier, I was thinking to myself, wow, that's all you guys got. I remember his time playing with the Islanders. I remember, that he was entrusted with a lot of responsibility as well, though. He shared some time playing with Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. We also remember that he played some of the first line with Alex Ovechkin. So the guy is used to big assignments. So that is at least one player that is going to step in and fill the void. But when you're talking about Beauvillier, he's not flashy. He's not going to put up a 70-point season, but he's versatile. He's a player that Spencer Carberry called a Swiss Army knife because he can play up and down the lineup reliably. He just finished last season with the Caps and looked comfortable. And I've said about him on this show that he was a bit of a consolation prize for the Capitals, as we know that the talk out there was that the Capitals were all in on Nikolai Ehlers. And I say that half kidding. I think the Capitals genuinely like Anthony Beauvillier's game. And I think that ultimately that is why they signed him to an extension. And then as far as other offseason moves are concerned, lacking in the luster department, if you will, is Justin Sourdif, a player that the Capitals gave up 2 draft picks to acquire. And you might be thinking to yourself, why did they do that for? Who in the world is Justin Sourdif? And then the word out there from Chris Patrick was that there were other teams out there vying for his services as well. They were willing to give up 1 draft pick. The Capitals were willing to give up 2. And that he was actually a great player. There was just a bit of a logjam in the Florida organization there. But picked him up from Florida. He's likely your 4th line right wing, responsible player, plays with energy. But let's be real here. We're not expecting him to set the world ablaze, shall we say. But this is where it gets interesting and a bit of a wild card, a big wild card. Ryan Leonard, Ivan Miroshnichenko, Andrew Cristall, Hendrix Lapierre. Now, although Lapierre is more of a center, you could see him at the wing position as well. If for some reason they like what they see, I don't think that maybe the Capitals are too eager to move Connor McMichael from that second line left wing. I know that he wants to. I know that is his native position. But if they have a better option, or at least a serviceable option in Hendrix Lapierre, I think that they would consider it. Now, Leonard is interesting as well. Competitive, plays with an edge, and I expect him to take a step forward this season. That's the hope, right? I have no feeling or reason to believe that he's not going to take a step forward. Knocked it out of the park with Boston College on the world stage. And I don't want to judge him too harshly based on what we saw from him in the latter part of the season. Just got his feet wet in the NHL, that I think that he will flourish once he gets more hours on his NHL odometer. Next, we'll talk about Ivan Miroshnichenko. Listen, we know the guy's got skill. We know the guy's used to overcoming adversity. The Hodgkin's lymphoma, terminating his KHL contract, moving over to the U.S., getting acclimated to the North American game. The things we know about him: the shot is lethal, his skating has improved. The question is the same as it is with Hendrix Lapierre and a lot of the younger Caps, is consistency and physical play in the NHL. Hendrix Lapierre in particular, I think needs to bulk up. I know that he's worked on that. That was kind of the same MO for Connor McMichael as well. Some of these guys come into the league pretty scrawny, so they have to modify their diet and hit the gym so they're not as easily driven off the puck, because there's some big dudes in the NHL. I think that that is kind of obvious. But another player that could change everything, and if in fact Connor McMichael does move to that third line center position, Andrew Cristall, one of the best playmakers outside the NHL right now, but skating, that's still his knock. Has shown signs of improvement. He's worked on the things that he can work on, hired a skating coach. He's bulked up. He can't get any taller, but can he keep up at this level? I think ultimately why the Capitals decided not to have him on the team last year is that it was risky, that they didn't want to burn the first year of his entry-level deal, all those kind of things, that they didn't want to have him up here for a while and then assign him. And last season, he was too young to play in Hershey. And then even if we want to get to an even more wild card, if you will, is Sonny Milano, a guy that missed all of last season, save 3 games with this questionable, ambiguous injury that we're not so sure what it is. He is trying to find his spot back on the team. And what I saw in the video footage is he looks really good. Is he good enough to earn a spot over Cristall? Over some of these younger guys that are vying for the jobs? That's going to be tough. If he stays healthy, he is a good depth scoring player with creativity. So that's the question. Do the Caps have enough depth at the wing position? On paper, yeah, there are options. There are options, but they're unproven options. And that is why many people question if the Capitals will take a step forward this season or if they will take a step back. Because the young talent on this team, we really don't know. And remember, last year, the Caps were third in power play percentage, 24.3, but 90% of that was Ovi and the top guys. So if the bottom 6 can't score, the numbers could slide, and it puts more pressure on Ovi and company playing big minutes on the top 6 there. So we're putting a lot of faith into these young players with Ethan Frank in the mix there as well, that these are all guys that are desperately fighting for their spot out there, so that they're not having to spend any more time in Hershey, or, to stay within the organization so they don't have to, some cases face waivers or whatever the case might be. We're really kind of pulling for some of these younger guys to finally impress. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Connor McMichael at the third line center. Something that has been spoke about quite often is next season, the season. I'll discuss next. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now, listen, on any given Sunday, if it is the Ravens playing, if it is the Commanders playing, you already have vested interest in these games. But if you want to make all of the games more exciting, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on the fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by going to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Cap. So in the second segment here, we're talking about Connor McMichael at that third line center position. Is this going to be the season for Connor there? Some people would have said we should have tried it last year. And they did, towards the latter part of the season. But I think that they were hoping last season, to kind of dovetail with what I was talking about in the first segment, that the young guy, Hendrix Lapierre, was going to be enough. As it turns out, wasn't good enough. So they tried Scarbosa in there. They cycled in and they traded for to get Lars Eller. And none of the players really fit the bill. So I think the Capitals will at least give Connor McMichael the first kick at the can to start the season. And a big move by Spencer Carberry and his staff. Last year, McMichael had a breakout season, 26 goals, 31 assists, 57 points, career highs across the board. Great chemistry with Pierre-Luc Dubois. And on that second line as well, you saw on the right side, you saw Wilson, you saw Protas from time to time. And he did that mostly playing wing in the top six next to some truly elite players. Why? Because he was paired with or played on the same line rather than Pierre-Luc Dubois, a great playmaker in his own right. And he was also playing with confidence. He was playing with swagger in large part because of his play on the ice, but also because Spencer Carberry had faith in him. Now you're asking him to move back to his natural position, which is center and anchor that third line. No pressure. Lots of pressure. That the Capitals are looking to turn one of their biggest weaknesses, if not the biggest weakness, into one of their strengths. But playing the third line, that is a completely different job. Center is harder, face-offs, defensive zone coverages, matchups. You're the guy who has to be everywhere. And on top of that, he's not going to be playing with Ovi or Wilson or any of those kind of guys in the top six. He is going to be that anchor in the bottom six, more specifically on the third line center. He might have Beauvillier, maybe Milano, maybe a rookie. Leonard's going to be in the mix down there as well. So can he do it? That's the big question. Spencer Carberry has alluded to that the top six, like I've spoke about in the show, is the one that carries the bulk of the mail, but they're looking to spread that with the top six and bottom six. So if, Connor McMichael can be the guy to jumpstart the third line, that could be huge. So translation to what Spencer Carberry wants is balance. They want balance, even scoring. You see that with Florida, Stanley Cup winners. You see that with Vegas. The proof is in the pudding. Because the big thing is last year, the Caps were great offensively overall, big picture, but the third line, it was a black hole at times. Now, if McMichael can drive that play on that line, huge difference. The catalyst, the jumper cables, if you will, for that third line. Think about the playoffs. That's the big thing. The Capitals were kind of nowhere to be seen in the second round. I mean, they were there, but where were they? Depth scoring wins in the postseason. And if your third line can chip in, so it's not just the top six carrying the bulk of the mail, you are going to be a team that can play better on the bigger picture. You're going to be a nightmare to play against because a lot of teams don't have that. If they can't, you're going to be relying on your stars, i.e. the top six, to carry the load of the mail. And that's a recipe for trouble in the regular season. It's also a bigger recipe for trouble in the playoffs. So here's my take on it. I think that Connor McMichael can do it. I think that this is the season he's at least going to be given the opportunity to do it. And it's ultimately up to him to seize the day. A lot of it's going to be chemistry. Who is he surrounded with? Right? He can't play center and wing. So I think that if, Spencer Carberry wants to set him up for success, he would couple him with, or, have on his line, Anthony Beauvillier or Ryan Leonard, or, someone that is going to generate offense, someone that is going to complement him. Think of the top two lines in particular, that both of those lines were quite dynamic, but the key denominator in that is that Strome and Pierre-Luc Dubois are great centers. And on the fourth line, Nick Dowd is no slouch either, so that could be huge. But faceoffs are going to be a test. He was 44.8% in limited draws last year. that has got to come up. I wouldn't read too much into that, as we know he spent a lion's share of his time on the wing position. But if Leonard, what kind of season he has, is he going to catapult and play in the top six, or will he be the third line? If it's Beauvillier, if it's Milano, you got skill. But do you have enough grit? I think that when you think of Anthony Beauvillier, you don't necessarily think of grit. I think he plays bigger than his frame would indicate, but he's definitely not a tough guy. And I think you could say the same thing about Sonny Milano. If you take a look at the top two lines in particular, they got some big guys, whether it's Wilson, whether it's Protas, whether it's Pierre-Luc Dubois, Alex Ovechkin, all really big frames. So if McMichael succeeds, I think that could be, one of the missing ingredients that helps take the Capitals over the top. Good. Obviously, last year, no one's going to try to take that from them. But I think the above all end all is to get this team to make a deeper push into the playoffs, or dare I say, a Stanley Cup win. All right. So coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Ovechkin's final season. I know I've spoke about it ad nauseum, but it is, as a matter of fact, one of, if not the biggest question heading into next season. I'll discuss next. We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answers about questions about advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you for helping us out. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. So heading into segment 3 here, talking about a man I've spoke about at length this summer, and that's Alex Ovechkin, the captain, the heartbeat. Going to be 40 years old here soon, and going to be his 21st year in the season, 21st season in the league, excuse me. And a lot of questions, as we know that he is entering into his final year under contract. And, what do we know? Well, what we do know, however, is that there was that email that went out to the season ticket holders that said that this is going to be his final season, and then they reeled that one in real quick. And then there was the interview with Natsia, Alex Ovechkin's wife, that said that this was going to be his final season. And then what was said was, that was just lost in translation between English and Russian. And the only thing we have to hang our hat on about Ovi is that he said he's not sure what he's going to do. And a lot of people, I'm talking Capitals beat writers, they are putting all their chips in that basket to say, see, he said he's not going anywhere. He's not sure. I think stick to the latter there. He's not sure. He never said that he's going to stay. I don't think that optically that it would look good for him at this point to say, this is my final season, as I've spoke about on this show, that every stop, what's it like playing your final game in Toronto or Pittsburgh? He wants to concentrate on this team, winning another Stanley Cup. I think that that is the right idea. So let's dive into that in the final segment of today's show. The greatest goal scorer in NHL history. Still doesn't really seem real yet, does it? That it seems like something that he had been chasing for quite some time. But on September 17th, he is going to be 40. And already the comments about, Father Time is undefeated and all these kind of things. But Ovechkin has shown no signs of slowing down. If anything, he has shown signs of improvement. And GM Chris Patrick said they haven't had any talks yet. It's going to be up to Ovi when those conversations happen. So they're not giving him the full court press to come back because, he is the captain. He has done what he has done. He's revolutionized hockey in Washington in a big way. So they're giving him his space just the same way that they've done with, to a lesser extent, Ryan Leonard and, Andrew Cristall. So let's look at where he's at. Last season, Ovechkin missed 16 games with that fractured fibula, still scored, can you believe it, Still hard to believe. 44 goals in 66 games at 39 years old. Sitting at 897, the greatest goal scorer of all time, and 3 away from 900. He's 9 games away from 1,500. There's a lot at stake, and 19 points shy of passing Joe Sakic for 10th all time in points. So, the funny thing is that, he's chasing down, or he was chasing down Gretzky, past Gretzky. And you think, well, that's got to be enough, right? He's won a Stanley Cup, but no, there's still all these milestones, all these accomplishments that he has knocked down along the way. So here's the question. If he gets 900, which of course he's at 897, is that enough for him to get 900 and to walk away? Well, do I think that 900 is that important to him? I mean, reasonably, but I think hitting 900 is a no-brainer. If he's at 897, I mean, something would have to go horribly off the rails not to get 900. So I don't think that that's what's going to keep him around. I have not wavered. I still sincerely believe that this is his last season, but that's me. That's my take on it. Doing these shows, you have to have an opinion. And, kind of just reading Alex Ovechkin, just based on observing him his entire career, that's kind of where I feel like he's at. Could he change his mind? Sure. A guy's willing, has every right to change his mind. But as of right now, really early take, I think that, yes, this is going to be his final season. But, you take a look at Ovi and, the argument for him playing longer. He's a competitor. He loves the game, and he's still producing at a high level. At even strength last year, he scored 27 goals, still top 15 in the NHL. His shot still elite. His power play production, 17 goals on the man advantage. So there's no decline there yet. But the question is, and I think this is the thing to underline, boldface, highlights, the big thing here is how much longer does he want to play? I think that he could observe the Capitals. Does Leonard, Miro, Cristall, do these guys help elevate the Capitals? Does it make them a better team? Would he entertain a 1 to 3 year extension? Maybe. I think that the Capitals play this next season will at least play a part of his decision. So the decline isn't there yet. The question is, how long does he want to do it? If they're not, maybe this is his farewell tour. I think that he has 1 foot out the door, but I don't think that it's unrealistic to think that he couldn't be reeled in. Like, say, the Capitals won a Stanley Cup, or, something of that nature. Say he feels like they are just a couple clicks away from going to the next level. Because I guess if they won a Stanley Cup, that would even be more of a reason to retire here. So there are still a lot of balls in the air, whether it's his last dance or not. It is one of, if not the biggest story to follow this season for the Capitals heading into the 25-26 season. Alex Ovechkin, is he done? Does he have more fuel in the tank? I think it's not for a lack of having enough fuel in his tank. It's just about his desire, right? Does he still want to keep playing hockey after his contract is over at the end of next season? That's the big question. And I know I've said my piece on it, and I've heard from a lot of Capitals fans thinking, I don't know, Dan, I think he might hang around for a few more years. Hey, if he decides to do it, I guess that would be a great thing. It's just, what does a new contract look like for Alex Ovechkin? And I would rather see Alex Ovechkin go out on a high note than if all of a sudden there is a big dip in production. Say he faces a substantial injury, or say for some reason he's just not the Ovi of old. I would rather him go out on top. He'll always be a legend, beating the Gretzky record, winning a Stanley Cup will never, ever take that away from the great 8. But I would rather have him go out on his terms, not feeling pressure from the fans, not feeling pressure from the Capitals organization. He wants to do it. Let him make a decision between him and his wife and his children, and just sit down and say, what do we want to do? This is what I want to do. Let me hear your thoughts. I think that's where he's at. I think his wife, Natsia, and his children very well might want to go back to Russia, and just ride out into the sunset with his legacy intact. It'll be interesting to see. Definitely a storyline to follow. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.